honoured to be joined today by Mark Schulman. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing so great, man. Everything is going so well, and I'm really grateful to be talking to you. You know, you're one of my favorite people. You always take me to the best curry places whenever I come to London, and we hang. And
We
I
always have, well,
have a lot of regard for you, Nick. So I'm
soon,
happy to be doing this.
Mark, soon we'll be coming back and we'll be able to go out for another great curry together.
Oh yeah.
So listen, let me ask, you speak about hacking the rockstar attitude. What does that look like? And why is it something we should all apply?
I will tell you because, when I tell people it all begins with attitude, I get a lot of people thinking, really, that's all you got? Attitude, schmattitude. Yeah, I've been hearing about that my whole life. But attitude has enormous power because your attitude is your viewpoint. And what I've discovered is, I was taught this by the gentleman who's co-writing my next book on the power of attitude, is that we know we cannot control what happens to us so much of the time. It's very obvious, but you have the power at any point in time, I'm talking about right now, to control, change, or shift your attitude about what is happening. And all that takes is literally a decision to choose an attitude that serves you. And that gives you immense power because that gives you leverage for starters. And you never underestimate the power of a decision, because when you truly make a decision about an attitude that you want to possess, you're cutting off all other possibilities. And your attitude really is your viewpoint. It's your vantage point or your disadvantage point, depending upon the attitude you choose. Because it's not only not what we look at, it's what we see and perceive that determines our experiences and our realities, the way we perceive ourselves, the lens through which we see the world, the meaning we attach to people, places, and circumstances. And these are all really determined by the stories that we tell ourselves. And the stories we tell ourselves are a function of the attitudes that we choose. And who's telling the story? You're telling the story. Who's the narrator? You're the narrator. You're the only one that has the power to change the narrative. But it just begins there because attitude is the basis for this amazing formula that I live by. That, as I say, is the topic of my next book, because your attitude is what drives your behavior. And think about the power and the implications of that for a moment. And your behavior is what determines the consequences or outcomes of your life. And so the formula is A times B equals C. So I'm absolutely suggesting that by shifting your attitude, you can literally shift the outcomes of your life. And it's been a game changer for me ever since I learned it. And I attribute my success to my skill set and my ability to shift my attitude at will. And I create attitude shifts like daily. It's incredibly powerful. And then when I give my keynote, I give all these really fun examples of how you can do it. And I show people how to shift attitudes and examples of attitudes and examples of Pink shifting her attitude and how she almost died and what she did to shift that. She crawled back on the stage, even though she had literally almost died. And I was in Europe, by the way.
Yeah, I saw it on the series, which the Netflix Amazon series.
Oh yeah, isn't that a wonderful documentary?
Amazing.
My daughter got more screen time than I did, I think. She's friends with Willow.
So tell me this, kind of everything you're saying, obviously the last 2 years have kind of changed everyone's attitudes, perceptions, and everything else. How's it been for you? How was it shifting your attitude over the fact that you couldn't tour, and obviously kind of music stopped? Kind of how did it affect you both positively and negatively?
Well, I was slated to do about 100 live gigs. I finally had a year that I wasn't touring, so I could freely speak. And in the months of March and April, I had 19 gigs fall out. So you can imagine, essentially I was paralyzed. And I had never done what I call my rock show disguised as a keynote live, and I knew the virtual world was upon us. And I was telling myself all these stories, how I couldn't recreate the interactivity because I do a lot of interactivity. I couldn't do the drumming. Then I woke up a couple of days later, I thought, what kind of pathetic story am I telling myself? And I realized after doing some research that even one of Darwin's theories that isn't even talked about as far as the survival of the fittest, that isn't the popular theory, is it really is how we adapt to change. So I did so much research and I really just distilled it down to its foundation. It's all about how we manage change. There's one or two ways of managing change. You either embrace it or you resist it. And I was resisting it for a few days, and I woke up one day and I thought, what kind of pathetic story am I telling myself? And I literally did a reframe of my mind. I decided to embrace the change. And the moment I made that decision to embrace the change, I started getting these creative ideas, and I became solutions-oriented instead of barrier-fixated, goal-oriented. Then I got really excited about putting together the virtual speech. Now I've done 100 speeches, virtual speeches for some very happy clients. But I tell people this because what you resist not only persists, as they say, but it can become this big, ugly monster that can literally paralyze you. And if you could just remember in those moments of resistance that you actually have the ability to shift your mindset and embrace it, you'd be amazed at how creative and how solutions oriented you become. But I understand the fear as well. And fear has served us very well evolutionarily. You know, it saved our lives, but most fear is displaced. I did some more study. I came to find out that the center of the brain, the amygdala, is what manufactures the chemistry for fear and excitement. They're virtually identical. They're like flip sides of the same coin. It's just our perception and our projection of this chemistry that determines our experience. So you have the ability to take that fear and just shift it into some sort of excitement, and then you become goal-oriented. And that's what saved my life. And then I became really, really motivated to do whatever I could do to embrace the change during the pandemic. And I did. And I really embraced it. I worked really, really hard. This is the room that I shoot in. We had just built this room, as I told you earlier, and I have this big green screen, and I got creative with how I could do the interactivity and pre-recorded the drums with a green screen and changed the script and got used to looking at a camera instead of 5,000 people. And we adapt. If you adapt, you survive. And I think the adaptation, the embracing of the change, it really is the foundation of that.
Can I ask on a slightly tangential thing? I was telling people that I was going to be speaking to you today, and one of the questions someone asked me, which I found quite interesting, was as a drummer, your job is to keep the tempo. Many jobs, but your job is to keep the tempo for everyone out there. What's your advice to teams, kind of, I suppose, who are working through adversity, and maybe people are on different tempos themselves as they've gone through the last 2 years? How do you bring people back together and make sure you are all on the same beat?
Well, I'll start by debunking the myth. It's not the drummer's job to keep the tempo. It's everybody's job. And I realized that I found that out because I can keep a fairly solid tempo, but if the band wants to push, I could fight the band or I could push with the band. Or if the band, needs more coffee and is tired and wants to pull back, I'll pull back with the band. So the idea is reading the tempo of the people around you, reading the tempo of your industry, of is it time to release something? Is it not time to release something? So I think if you're paying attention to the tempo of the people that you're working with, whether it's virtually or whether you're back in the office, and you're, as opposed to being stuck in your own tempo, and I think it's really critical because it's okay, tempos can ebb and flow. It's like the workflow, but I think what it takes is it really takes paying attention to the tempos of others and reminding others if they are pulling back, like if they're dragging, so to speak, if somebody in the band is dragging and they're pulling everybody back, then you can sort of help them move and speed up their tempo. But so much of it is reading ability and listening ability. And so many people love to talk. One of the things I've found about being a great band member or team member is if you are a great listener, then you are really able to receive other people's communication that they feel so profoundly necessary to communicate, and that can enable you to read their tempo. So much of it is empathy, compassion, getting out of your own head. And even when it comes to my relationship with my wife, I'd rather be happy than right. So I think if you are willing to assume the viewpoint of others, assume look at it from where they are looking at it from, then you can actually understand their tempo, understand their reasons, and then you're going to get along better, and then you're going to be more of a grooving band, I would call it.
I love that. So tell me this, one last question for you.
Sure.
What do you think people are missing from their everyday lives? If there was one thing you say, people take this and you go out and you're going to be a better person, you're going to be a happier person. Give me the magic bullet.
I think the magic bullet literally is what I do every single day when I'm just smart enough to remember, which is stopping and being present in the moment. And I know that sounds a little trite to some people, but there's always a point. We walk the dog. We got a puppy, so we walk her 3 times a day. And there's always one spot that reminds me when we get to the top of the hill, I just stop and I just look and I just embrace it. And I just allow the joy to come in, because I think what's missing is the joy. And joy is a chemical as well. And joy is something that you can create and embrace. Like these attitudes, your attitude is something you choose. You could choose an attitude of joy, and you just recall a time when you were joyful. Recall a time with your family, with your lover, when you're hanging out with your friends, when you're having a party, when you're reading a great book, and just remember these joyful times so you can then sort of relive the joyful times, and all of a sudden you embody joy. Because I think that people have forgotten about joy. People have forgotten about gratitude. I'm an evangelist when it comes to gratitude. Pink calls me Disneyland, because I remind everybody of gratitude. And that's because I am such an evangelist about it, because I realize that when I'm feeling down or I'm feeling funky, if I could just think of one person or one thing for which I'm grateful and just hold it, give myself the luxury of doing that, I feel better. Then I think of somebody else. Then I think of something else and something else. And I'm really building a fortress of gratitude. Gratitude is an attitude shift that is incredibly powerful, because no matter what is happening to you, you can be grateful about one little thing. And if you can find that the bit of gratitude, it really can profoundly shift your experience. Because remember, it's not what we look at, it's what we see and perceive that determines our experience. So you have the choice of the experience that you want to have. And right now, if you just sat there and you said, okay, I'm going to recall a time that I was joyful. I even do this when I speak to people live, and I say, close your eyes, clench your fist, tighten your core as hard as you can, because you're creating physiology, and recall a time you were joyful. So it comes through your entire body, and then you release it. And everybody in the audience is smiling because you're joyful. All of a sudden, you've created joy. And it sounds very simple, but sometimes the answers are the simplest answers. We tend to over-complexify things way too much.
I think, Mike, that's what I love about you, is genuinely you always you bring such joy and happiness and you make it so attainable rather than it being something too aspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee, for your time today. It's been, as always, a pleasure speaking.
Mate, it's my pleasure. I can't wait to see you. I'm chomping at the bit to come to England. I cannot wait.
Listen, right now with the weather as it is, wait till next summer and it'll be beautiful then.
Anyway, mate, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Yes.